Check, check.
So if you press it once, it mutes it. So I'm gonna press it again.
Got it. Okay. No buttons. Okay. You ready? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started now. Thanks so much. If you're coming in, just go ahead and sign in, and you're going to grab everybody should have a one-sheeter and a postcard, as well as a little index card. My name is Danielle Clark. I'm the Executive Director of Communications for Poudre School District. And with us tonight, we have Dr. Sandra Smizer, our superintendent, and we have Ms. Kim Newcomer, who's going to facilitate for us. Really briefly, I want to make sure that you're all in the right place and that you didn't come here expecting something different. We're going to be talking about Poudre School District's long-range plan and our proposal for new facilities and ongoing improvements, as well as a proposed financing package for construction based on that plan. So everybody's in the right space, making sure you're at the right meeting. Okay, great. So you should have a one-sheeter that explains the plan as well as the alternative growth plan. You should have a postcard that was mailed to anyone who did not have a student in Poudre School District. And then you should have an index card. The index card is so you can write down questions. At the end of Dr. Smizer's presentation, we'll come around and collect those index cards. Mrs. Newcomer will be able to see through them. She'll ask them. Dr. Smizer will respond, or we have several staff members here able to respond as well. We have cameras, as you can see. We are streaming live on the PSD website as well as on Comcast Channel 10. And for those viewers who are watching us, they can submit questions via email to info@psdschools.org. We're not taking them live, but we will respond within 24 hours. So with that, Ms. Newcomer, we'll leave it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for being here. Just quickly, again, my name is Kim, and my job really here tonight is to make sure that we get through as many questions as we can so that you have all of those questions answered here tonight. For those folks, again, watching at home, you can send your questions in via email at info@psdschools.org. And our hope is, as I mentioned before, to get through all of your questions while we have experts in the room so that you can feel informed as we move forward with this process. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Dr. Smizer for a presentation and an introduction of the other members of her staff here tonight.
Okay. So good evening. I see some familiar faces here that have been at some of the other meetings that we have had, and it's nice to see you back again. I'd like to introduce some of our honored guests here. We have some of our board of directors. We have Kathy Kipp, who is our board president. We have Nate Donovan up in the back, newly elected to the board in last fall. And I think that's it for board members. For staff, we have Brendan Willits with planning. We have Edie Eccles, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary, Todd Lambert, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Schools, Dave Montoya, in charge of finance for the district, and Danielle, you just met from communications. I think that's all of our staff. We have had a community facilities advisory group that's been meeting, and raise your hand if you are in that group so we can introduce you. Len Work has been at every meeting and is contributing perspective, particularly from this region of our school district. So we started this process in 2014 with staff and experts. So we had demographers, we had people work with our experts as well to figure out the projected enrollment of the district, where the students were going to be coming from. The growth in our district is strong, and it is projected to continue to grow over the next few years quite a lot. But it is not growing evenly in all regions. If you live in this area, you know that the growth is happening in different places. And our goal is always to have schools where the kids are and not have to send students too far from where they live. And so as we looked at our long-range plan for facilities, we've been looking at regional issues as well across the district. So the district is Larimer County, so we go all the way up to Wyoming. And we have a significant amount of students who are on the other side of the highway. A lot of them up here and all the way down towards Timnath and even south. So we do have a very large district. We go all the way up to Stove Prairie, and it's a large amount of square footage, square miles actually. I see Susan Gutowski from our board of directors has just arrived. You can do the wave. We have had over 165 meetings since we started this process. So we've met up here at least 5 or 6 times, 2 meetings per school, as well as 2 or 3 community meetings like this one. I think this might be our third, to discuss this plan. The difference between all of those meetings and this one is that I now have in my hand our final plan, which just went to the board last night. So you are actually the first community group meeting to see the final plan with my recommendations. So all of the meetings we've had over the last year have been to talk about options, to talk about concerns, and to look at all the different ways and listen to our community about what they wanted. And so it's been my job to put that together and make a final recommendation to the board. So I did that last night, and you're going to see here in a moment the components of my final plan. We did not ask the board to vote on that plan last night because of meetings like this one. So now that the plan is finalized, we're going around to each community. I think we have 6 meetings-ish, 6, that we'll do in the next few weeks before the board votes on the final plan. So the board is still very open to your input. Please feel free to send them an email if you like. This is Yvonne Myers just came in. She has been the chair of our Community Facilities Advisory Committee for us. She's been great. Yvonne, do the wave. And she's been great. We've just had participation from so many community members. It has been great. And I won't pretend that we've been able to make everyone happy in this plan. There are components of this plan that we know a few people at least are unhappy with, but that's the nature of making some choices. So as I get to some of those choice points that staff has made as we've developed our final our recommendation to the board, I'll explain to you some of the pros and cons and why we went the way we did. All right? So let's start by just reviewing the growth that we're seeing. So we have had 500 new students this year, actually just under 500 the year before. We're on pace for 500 again next year. As we look at growth, we're looking at ramping up by about 500 students a year. That's students that are new to our district, to our region. That increased enrollment, I should say, but because we always lose some and get some every year. This is additional increased enrollment. So if you think about that, if all of those students were in one place, that's the size of a large elementary school. So we're already, over the last few years, gaining the size of an elementary school every year, which is a lot of kids. Thankfully, they are not all in elementary school. They're spread out over the grade levels, and they're spread out over the regions. So we can infill and we can pack our schools, and what we're finding is that our schools are getting packed. So you know that here at Wellington Middle School, it's getting much more crowded than people are used to. You know also that down on the southeast side of town, all of those schools are getting very, very big, and we're having to add modulars to buildings as we have here because the kids no longer fit in all of the classrooms. So we are recommending a $375 million bond ask to the community at the presidential election in the fall. And also a small mill levy override to support the opening of these new schools. So this would be new schools, an improved regional athletic facility, some transportation facilities, and renovations in each one of our existing schools. Ongoing facilities improvements. The mill would begin in 17-18, so if this bond passes, we would begin the construction process on the new schools immediately. But the mill, we would not collect money immediately because we don't quite need it yet. It's designed to start closer to the time when the schools would open. So we would begin collecting the mill later. We have done the numbers, and Dave is here to talk to you about finance. What we have is we have a bond payment that is dropping off of our books. So we believe that we can finance all of this new construction without raising the tax rate. So if you think about your home mortgage, okay, you go to the bank, you borrow the money, they give you the cash, you go and you build your home, and then over time in your mortgage you pay for that building, okay? Bonds are somewhat similar. We issue bonds. People buy the bonds. We take the cash. We go and build the schools, and then the property tax owners of the entire district all share in paying off that bond, okay? What is happening is we have been very aggressive in this district to pay principal off, not to push debt out into the future and pay only interest up front. You know, if you have a mortgage, you can do that and save money, but it hurts you in the long run. As a district, we do not do that with our bonds. We pay principal up front, so we have a large bond payment that is being paid off. So it's as if your mortgage was paid out. We have room to add another bond in and keep that tax rate the same. Now, to be clear, your taxes are going up. They are going up because your assessed valuation is going up, okay? So the tax rate will stay the same if this is approved, okay? So what would you like to add on the finance? Okay. There you go.
Okay. Well, good evening. Again, my name's Dave Montoya. I'm the Executive Director of Finance for the school district. And I've got the next two slides that are a graphical representation of how we're going to accomplish this over the course of the years that we've got in our plan. So, and I have to stay in this box, I understand, so I will. These blue bars that you see on this graph are basically representations of our annual debt service payments as we have right now. So as you can see over on the far, your left-hand side of the chart, you can see that there's an actual fairly large step down from the 2016 to the 2017 year. And what that represents is us paying some debt off, and that's maturing and we won't have to pay that any longer. So we do have some capacity, and what the dotted line represents that you see going across the top is what we would anticipate that capacity being if we held that tax rate at the static 52.63 mils that we should all see on our property tax statements. So you can see as assessed valuation grows over time, that dotted line actually goes up because assessed valuation is going up, and we potentially have more capacity at that 52.63 mils to fill in some debt in the override. And that's exactly what this next chart is showing, is the modeling that we're doing to actually accomplish this. And so you can see here that the orange bars are the first issue, and we'd have to issue the debt into two chunks or two phases. The first one would be we'd issue $250 million up front right after the election, and you can see the orange bar represents the annual debt payments that we would have to make on the behalf of taking that cash. Some may notice that the bar dips above the dotted line in the first year, right after we issue. Yes, we're aware of that. We do have some bond reserves that are going to accommodate that, and then over time we'll actually put that money back into that bond reserve, but that's a one-year hurdle that we're trying to get past. Once we get past that, you can see that we're able to fold in the mill levy. That's represented by the gold bars, and eventually 3 years out, we're able to issue the second piece of the debt, of which would be the remaining $125 million issue. So you can see that this plan actually takes us out to about 2022, of which our next step downs would occur after that. And so we believe that this structure here, it's important to understand, and I'm going to reiterate what Dr. Schmeiser said, this is level debt service. So we're not just paying interest up front. Many districts are doing that and potentially going to get themselves in trouble 20 years down the road. We don't do that. We're planning on doing level debt service. And so there we're going to be paying principal and interest off as those bonds come forward, and eventually after 24 years, it's the full cycle of all of this, they would mature, and then a future generation would be having a similar conversation.
So what would we do with that money? So this is the plan for the new construction. $313 million of it would go to building the new schools for growth. So we have a new school on the southeast part of the district, way down close to the ranch, okay? A middle school, high school at the Prospect site. Now this would be a high school building modeled after Fossil Ridge High School's building, which was the last one that we built. We save money by doing some redesign on that building, but not starting from scratch. We also save money by putting it on the site that we already own. So that's on the east side of Prospect, just on the other side of the highway. And it would open with a middle school and a high school sharing the building. Now we did that when we opened Fossil and Kennard. They only shared the building for 2 years, and then we built a middle school and Kennard moved out. I cannot promise you that it will only take 2 years for the high school to be big enough and the middle school to be big enough to separate. We don't know yet how much time it will take for them to separate, but I will tell you that that's part of why we stuck with this model, is that it provides flexibility between all those grade levels. So if the middle school kids who move into the area, there tend to be more of those, we can accommodate them in that building, or vice versa. If the high school kids, there's more of them, we can accommodate them. And so we would do that. We will do the same thing up here in the Wellington area, slightly smaller. The projections for this area are also a lot of growth, but not quite as many. So we would build the Fossil Ridge building here, less one wing up here, so that we could in the future add another wing on. In the case of Wellington, Wellington is very different because Wellington's middle school needs a new building. Already really crowded and old, hard to remodel, and also has very little land. So when you look at the postage stamp that the school sits on, it's just not that big. There's not much you can do about the fact that there isn't much land. So the idea would be to move Wellington Middle School into this building, as well as add the high school students. So the designs of these two schools and how they operate will be different, likely, between the two, largely because Wellington Middle School already exists and has an identity, and at the other end, at the Prospect site, there is no identity there. They may choose, as a school community, to create themselves more as a 612, maybe not. There are some very exciting 612s across the state, but that remains to be determined in the future. It may be that it starts out as two completely separate schools sharing a building and then morphs into something else as the community and the parents decide what they want to do. Zach Elementary is down south, and we believe that the region around that school is almost built out. We cannot fit all those kids in that building. We already have several modulars there, but we believe that with an addition on that building, we can accommodate the future kids that will live in that area. They don't need a whole nother school. They just need a small wing added on, and then the enrollment will go up and it will come back down and top out at the capacity of that building. That's what our best projections show us at this time. At the Prospect site, we're proposing to build another French field, basically. So another regional, as we grow and we have 2 more high schools, over time, we are gonna need more athletic facilities, and it's an awful lot to have all these kids driving all the way to French Field to compete. French Field is very crowded, very heavily scheduled, very difficult to use now with just all of the athletics that we have. And to be clear, this will be not just a football field. So it will be a stadium that will be used for regional football, but it also will be lined, the fields will be lined for all of the different field sports so that everybody has more play time and practice time. And we can split all the kids between two facilities instead of one. And then in transportation, we have tried not to put as very much infrastructure into this bond, but as you can imagine, as we grow this much over time, we have need for infrastructure needs in the district as we just have more and more kids. We now have just under 200 buses, most of which are the really, really long ones. And we service all of those buses in a very tiny little shop that has no lift and no well. So we're servicing a fleet of 170 some, almost 180 buses by crawling around underneath them. That's just not okay. We've grown too much. We can't continue to operate like that. So our proposal is, and this already exists over near the district office on the property there by Poudre High School, and we would take out the old and right on the same spot, just put in a new facility with lifts that fits the huge buses. Okay. So the Southeast Elementary School would relieve pressure at Bacon, Bethke, and Timnath. We would replicate the Bethke model, so basically building a school that will house 600 students. It would open in 2018, and so we would have some grandfather. In all of these schools, it's likely, unless we grow a lot faster than we think we are, which we think is fast enough, we should have time to allow quite a bit of grandfathering. So if a student's in 5th grade, they should be able to finish where they are instead of going to a new school for 5th grade, for example. Then the middle school, high school at Prospect site would alleviate pressure at Fossil, Preston, and Lesher, which are packed out. I think I mentioned all of this. So it would open in 2020, and same thing, we would likely open it with 9th and 10th graders coming into the high school, but allowing 11th and 12th to finish wherever they were. And then if you have new 11th and 12th graders move in, just send them to the new school. They have no loyalties to the other school, right? So we would try to be smart about grandfathering if possible. This is some information about the athletics complex. So the basic idea is, and we are building this one to be a little bit smaller than French Field. Same idea, a little bit smaller, not quite as large as seating. And then up here, we are talking to a local landowner at this time, but we have not purchased land up here yet. It would alleviate pressure at Poudre High School and replace current Wellington Middle School. The future of the building Wellington Middle School, is unknown at that point. We could sell it, we could repurpose it for something else. And then this one would be a smaller version of the other high school building, also to open in 2020. And then Zach is a 2-classroom addition with 2 other rooms being expanded so that there's 2 other rooms that can become classrooms. And it makes Zach permanently large enough to be a 600 student elementary school. And then transportation, I told you about that. So as we look at ongoing facilities improvements, you have to keep in mind that we have all kinds of other school buildings that have all kinds of facility needs. It's very difficult to keep them all up, and they have been built over a range of 100 years. So we have very, very old schools, very new schools. We're trying to prioritize money for ongoing facilities improvements for the older schools. And we have looked at all of the buildings. So every school community with their advisory council of parents and teachers worked through their priorities for the building upkeep in terms of the occupants' desires. We also had an intense scrutiny from our facilities department that looks at the roofing, the asphalt, the HVAC systems, what does the guts of the building need. And then we had Yvonne, where did Yvonne go? Sit with us for almost 2 whole days and go through this, I don't know how many, hundreds and hundreds of line item lists coming from both sources, and helped us to make choices about what would be funded for each building. So every building, every existing building has something in this list. Every school got something in their top 10. And then the facilities department made additional choices of critical needs that perhaps their top 10 did not include, that is also being done, proposed to be done in this project. And I will say, just to be clear, that our 4 charter schools will also receive an apportionment of that money for their facilities as well, or for something in their building. Because we don't own their buildings, it's difficult to justify putting an HVAC system in someone else's building that we don't own with taxpayer dollars. But we are giving them a proportionate share of money so that they can do furniture and equipment and some of the things that they need. I think I covered most of that. Fossil and Poudre and Fort Collins high schools would also receive synthetic turf fields. I didn't mention that, as will the new French field. The purpose of that is so that we can overplay the fields. Synthetic turf does have to be replaced on a regular schedule. It does wear out, but when you're using it, you can use it every hour, on the hour, all the time. You don't have to rest the grass. You don't have to water the grass. You don't have to deal with seasons and manage the turf. And so we can overplay the fields without killing them if they're not made of grass. So that's the purpose of doing a synthetic field. So the total amount spent on our existing schools would be $40 million out of this proposal. This is the distribution of funds based on the building age. So we are focusing on the schools built between 1960 and 78. 1960 and 1978 is where the majority of the money would go, based on the age of the buildings. So then the bond implementation expenses, $2 million to issue the bonds themselves. Remember that it's a $375 million bond. Costs $2 million just to do the issuance. Then the management of the actual projects. If you've been involved in large construction, you know there's a massive amount of construction management that happens as that project rolls out. That's $7.8 million. Architects, engineers, all the people that it takes to build the building, with a reserve of 3%, which is $12 million, which is industry standard. To make sure you have a reserve, anytime you build something, you have surprises. Then the operational mill would be to help us open those buildings. So when we start off, we will have lots of needs for staffing. You know, if you don't have very many kids, but you want to have a great program, you need a little bit of extra staffing so that you have good programming in the school from the time that it opens. And then we're hopeful that if we don't need, we would phase it in. As I mentioned before, we would not start collecting that mill at the beginning. We would wait until the buildings are ready to open. One of the examples of the extra funding that we need is the administrative structure itself. The people who are going to run these new schools would be hired most likely a year ahead of time, so that they can begin recruiting staff, meeting with the people who are going to go to that school with the families and parents, and talking about what programming do they want, what kind of teachers should they hire, what the course offerings should be when the door opens. And so all of that work would be the entire year before the school opened, as well as getting the people involved in the actual moving in and the excitement of having a new school. If we did not need that total mill, we have several options, and the language of the actual ballot measure in the election will determine what we can do with that money. What we're thinking about now is two big options. One is rolling extra money out to our student-based budgeting, so getting more money into all of our schools. The other option is if we don't need the money, say 6 or 7 years from now, we may be butting up against the need to build more schools anyway, so we may keep that money to help open the next round of new schools. Because if you look at this region, we're looking at needing to move the middle schools probably out of these two buildings as the high schools fill up, as well as adding more elementary schools across the district in the foreseeable future. That is part of the reason that we really want to keep the tax rate the same this time, because we really believe that in the near future, we don't know how many years, but 5, 7, somewhere in there, we will have to go out for another bond to build new schools, and at that point we will have to ask the community to raise the tax rate most likely for the next round of schools. So at this time, we'd like to be able to not do that and to do as much as we can staying underneath that tax rate. So the Board of Education has 2 decisions coming up. The first is whether to approve this plan or not. So at this point, this is staff's plan, this is my plan, this is our plan as staff. And the board is here, many of them, to listen to your questions and comments. And in about, how many weeks? 5 weeks, somewhere around in there, they're going to vote, they're scheduled to vote on this plan, whether that becomes the school district's plan or not. So that's their first decision. And then the second decision is how to finance it, and whether or not they are going to go out to the voters and ask for a bond, and whether it's going to be at the presidential election. You've heard that that's my recommendation. That's the number, 375 plus a small mill, and that those two should be on the ballot in the presidential election so that we can begin construction immediately. They have the option of approving the plan or not. And if they approve the plan, they could decide the timing's bad and we want to wait and roll more modulars out to classrooms, to schools in the meantime, and wait for another time to ask the community. I'm not hearing that from them right now, but that is an option. So we've separated it into 2 separate votes for them. So they'll be deciding first on the plan itself and then on how to finance it. Okay. So in the short term, in several regions of our district, parents are really noticing there's much less choice. We are just crowded, so there are less seats in our buildings for people to make choices. And that's very irritating to parents because they're used to being able to make choices, and if they want to go to a different school for some reason, they can. This is state law that you can go where you want. The district cannot make you go to your neighborhood school. That's state law, and our policy follows that law very carefully. If you live and have a neighborhood school, though, we cannot make you, by state law, go somewhere else. So we can't kick you out of your neighborhood school. Okay? So people choose where they want to live, but then they don't have to go to that school, but it just gives them they're first on the list if they want to. So district-wide, 70% of our kids go to their neighborhood school, and about 30% do not. That 70-30 is not the same at every school. Some schools have more kids going out, some have more kids coming in, but the district-wide number is 70-30. So it's very frustrating to people that the schools are getting so crowded that there are no opportunities for choice in some of the major regions of our district where all the schools are full. And unless you live there, you pretty much can't get in. And that's just not the kind of system we want to run here. So it's getting frustrating to a lot of people. We're rolling out modulars to, you have some here. If you look at one modular, think 50 students for one building, because they typically have a classroom in each side with approximately 25 in each side, each classroom. So every time you see one of those modulars as you drive around town and look behind schools, that's already 50 kids that don't fit in that building. Okay? So we're getting crowded. And if this bond should fail, if the voters just vote it down, we will continue to roll modulars out at schools because the kids are coming whether we build schools for them or not. They're coming. They've already started coming, and they're projected to come more. We have, I can ask Brendan, but we have thousands and thousands of approved homes in our district that are getting ready to be built. So, and then also we are doing whatever we can to modify classrooms inside buildings so that they can become full classrooms. So if we had a preschool program in there, we're sometimes moving that out so that we can put a kindergarten or a first grade class in there. We've had rooms that if we had water in that room, we could make it a science lab, and that would help them fit more kids into the high school. We did that at Fossil last summer, so we did that work. So we're doing as much work as we can to maximize the space that we have inside each building to pack more kids in, but at some point, they just don't fit anymore. Should the bond fail and the mill fail, we will, as I mentioned, the kids are coming anyway. They're all going to be here. So we will continue to see less and less choice in our district as we get more and more schools get more and more crowded. We'll continue to move modulars out. And that is not cheap, by the way. They are very expensive. They're about $200,000 a piece. And that does not include installation if you have to run water or electric to them. So it is not a cheap option to just put modulars all over parking lots everywhere. And then we will have limited funding for our ongoing facilities improvements because that part of the bond will have failed as well. And we may be looking at some boundary changes, trying to force people to go to different schools, and when a school just can't even fit its own neighborhood kids anymore, we may have to move a lot of boundaries. And worst case, very worst case scenario, we've seen it across the country over the years, if we should continue to not be able to build new schools, high school in particular will be the first one that just simply can't hold the kids anymore, and they are the ones most likely to have to do a split shift type environment where half the kids go in the morning and half the kids go in the afternoon. I'm not saying that would be next year, but in the foreseeable future, we're getting to the point where we're going to really struggle to put all the kids in the building. And I would say that before we got to that point, we would most likely go out to the voters again and ask again. Okay? So you are the first of 6 meetings that we're doing now that this plan is finalized. And what questions do you have? I'll turn it over to Kim.
Let's see. Oh, there it is. Great. Well, hopefully throughout this process, you've jotted down a few questions. Again, you have note cards in your hot hands, and if you could please write those down for us, it lets us cycle through them a little bit quicker, and it also helps us on the back end to record the questions and make sure that we share those with others who cannot be here tonight. So please go ahead and write down those questions. I'm also supposed to stay in my box, but I'm not going to, so I'll just run out and go ahead and grab those if you miss Danielle along the way. I think
They can be comments as well.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be a question.
Oh, very good. Comments, questions, we want to hear all of your feedback. I think one that I have, Dr. Smyser, and one of the benefits of not being a PSD employee is I get to ask the dumb questions. So we talked about the tax rate staying the same, yet we're still going out to the voters to ask for funding. So exactly what would that ballot initiative be asking for if it's not increasing our tax rate?
Good question. So the answer to that is technically it is a tax increase because if we don't do it, your taxes will drop. Okay, so the tax that you had approved at a previous election has dropped off because it's been paid off. So we have to ask you to put another bond in. So even though if you said yes, we would still be paying the same tax rate as before, it is a new bond, and so we have to ask you for that new bond.
So
Does that make
essentially,
sense?
one obligation ends and another would
And we
pick
have
up
to
right
ask
when
for a
it
new
ends.
one. Yes.
Okay, so along those same lines, what does mill levy override mean? That's a very good financial wonky term.
It's different than a bond, so I'll let you do that.
Would you like to come stand in my box? I'm happy to share my box.
So a mill levy override is simply where, and I won't take an hour to give you a budget presentation, but the way the school district gets funded is we get funded from a formula that is driven by state statutes by the legislature. A mill levy override is simply where a local district has the opportunity to go out to its voters within its district and say, what total program or what that formula is providing to us is not adequate. We need additional money to serve our kids. And so that's exactly what an override is that the law allows us to go out and ask the voters, can you provide additional support above and beyond what the state formula does? So that's a mill levy override. And we've passed 4 mill levy overrides in this district, and this would be our 5th.
Great. And again, I encourage you to write down those questions. This individual had a few questions that they actually wrote down the answers. So I think it's important to restate some of these key terms. So the length of the bond would be for 24 years. Is that correct? Oh, back to the
Okay,
bond.
so when we're looking at the bond, the way we've structured this is the first issue would actually go out 24 years. The second issue would go out 20 years. So they would both mature at the same time, but that's the way we had to structure it to make it work within this model. So we are going a little bit further out than 20 years on that first issue, but it's by design.
All right, and just while we're on the issue of bond and financing, the current recommendation that you have is to go out and ask for that bond approval this November at the November 2016 election.
That's correct.
Great.
And that would be a decision that the Board of Education would make, as Dr. Smyser had talked about in our presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to bounce around on topics here a little bit. So let's focus on the Wellington site and the impacts here locally. So before we even talk about the new facility, I guess there's a question about what happened to the old Wellington High School.
That was a long time before I got here. I know that there's still a ouch about it. There's no question. People still are sad that the original Wellington High School is not here anymore. And it was closed. And kids started going to Poudre. Do you have any more history on that? Yeah. Who remembers history from that? I thought that the saving of part of the building that's out there in the, where am I pointing? I think I'm pointing in the wrong direction. No, it is that way. Is really nice. You know, pieces of some of the iconic parts of the building are still out there in the park, and of course the memorabilia is here in the lobby. But I wasn't here. What year was that, Len? Do you know? I think it was like, yeah. As a matter of fact, I think last year was the 50th anniversary, wasn't it? It was part of the state reorg. Oh, okay. Yeah. So anyway, so that was 50 years ago. So it's been 50 years since Wellington's had a high school.
We're going to keep with our local focus here. So how big is the Wellington Middle School / High School projected to get? How many students do we think will get in that facility?
Yeah.
Come to the box.
Yeah.
So the school is anticipated to open somewhere, if grandfathering were not enacted, because I don't know what that will look like, but it could open up somewhere in the 11 or 1,200 range. It will be built as 2/3 effectively, design yet to be finalized, of what the current Fossil Ridge is. So as it grows and hits the 1,300-ish mark, then we can make the determination as a district whether to add on that third wing to make it a full high school footprint similar to what Fossil Ridge currently is and what the Prospect site would be, or you could build the middle school at that point, split the two, and then allow the high school to build up with an addition possible. There's a lot of flexibility in that, in the plan, and that's why we chose it. But generally, it will be built to house about 1,300. The design is not final, and then it would be designed to be able to be an addition to put on, or the middle school pulled out and then an addition later.
So while we're on the topic, will the proposed new middle school, high school be a traditional school or a trade school?
We're expecting it to be a traditional school, but we know that there's a lot of interest actually across the district and particularly in this region for trade experiences for kids. I just had a long meeting with Front Range Community College this morning about planning for what kinds of coursework could we offer here. So there's some exciting opportunities, but I will say that not everybody in Wellington wants to go to a trade school. So we are designing it as a regular high school, but we are looking very much to see if we can build up some of the career options for kids within that school.
So on that same programming theme, is there a plan for the Wellington High School to offer some of the same programs as Poudre?
Yes, but that plan really is not fleshed out. All we have done is looked at the size of the student body to determine, could we offer a good broad-based program to kids? And we believe we can, especially utilizing the fact that we can share staff across the grade levels from middle to high. But those decisions have not been made. So once this is passed and once the principal or principals are designated or hired to open this school, like I said, we're hoping that would be a year ahead of time, which is part of what this mill would pay for. Then we would begin the process of developing what's the courses going to be offered, who should we hire to work in this school, because you can't just offer any course unless you have somebody who's qualified to teach it. So we would have lots of community conversations about what are we going to offer, who's going to be the staff, and we simply have not made those decisions yet.
Staying here locally about impacts to Wellington, what conversations have taken place about Wellington elementary schools and the capacity there or the needs in that part of the system?
Well, they are, did you want to address that? Obviously, they are going to be growing as well. Go ahead.
I would say, yeah, we're looking, you're talking about Istone Elementary and Rice Elementary. Both of them we're monitoring their capacity. Both of them are in a spot right now where they can take a little bit more growth. I know David's here. Istone's at about 75% utilization, somewhere in that area, climbing slowly. But there's plenty of room at Istone, and we also think Rice can accommodate in the foreseeable future some of the items that you see as we handle growth. We'll pay attention to if it's necessary. Right now, we're not quite there.
Which isn't to say that in the long-term future, there'll be another elementary school here. Likely there will be somewhere, but not in this plan at this time.
Wonderful. Going to stay on this theme. So what class, for example, A, AA, AAA, would the proposed Wellington Middle School, High School be?
I can't remember. We looked at it. Who was here that night? We're thinking AA or AAA. It would be interesting because it's possible that as Poudre shrinks a little bit and gets inside its building again, instead of all over the parking lot, we may actually end up with 6 schools, 2 of one size, 2 of a middle size, and 2 of a bigger size, rather than having them all be the same size, at least for a period of time. And so that's interesting dynamic that's a little different than what people are used to. We actually do not make the decision locally what level of play they are. That is made statewide by CHASA, but just guessing on the numbers.
So when we talk A, AA, AAA, we're talking athletics.
Yes.
That's always helpful too.
That's the size of the football teams and the size of the other schools that you would compete against.
Okay.
Let me say though, that's league play. That's competitive CHASA play. That doesn't mean we couldn't play each other. Locally, we can play each other anytime we want. So it doesn't mean that we couldn't have 2 teams play each other in a rivalry game, even if they're not the same size. As long as nobody gets hurt, right?
So does, always. So does going with the 2 hybrid schools, 2 high school, middle school options, instead of just one big prospect high school option, does that limit the course offerings or the academic and extracurricular opportunities for our students?
I would say it will limit it some, but simply in number of options. So we've looked at other schools that have that age range and that are smaller high schools, and we've dug down into the schedules and how many course offerings we could have. We believe that we could offer up to 80, I think it was 80 electives, that a lot of those the kids themselves pick. Clubs are great because clubs are just whatever the kids want. They're allowed to start a club in all of our high schools. The difference would be some of the higher level coursework. Some of the AP courses we may have to alternate years. So the schedule would be published probably in a 2-year time frame instead of 1 year at a time. So if you know you want to take a particular AP class, you would know you need to take it your junior year because your senior year it's not offered, or the other way around. So that is how schools this size manage having all the same high-level coursework, is they do it in an alternating fashion. So that's what we're looking at least to open while the school is smaller.
Is kind of moving on to more timing and how all of these improvements roll out. Is there a reason that the Southeast Elementary and the Wellington Middle/High School can't be built at the same time? And I think the comment is Wellington Middle School is well past capacity and Poudre is well past capacity, and it just seems like there's a real strong need here at this time.
Who wants to do that one?
So the timing, how is the timing established?
Basically.
I can speak to the
Yeah.
property issue that affects the timing. An elementary school is easier and has a shorter build time. Not easier, it's faster, has a shorter build time. So that's one difference between an elementary school and a middle school, high school. The other one would be that we have that property, and the developer around that is planning on putting in infrastructure, which will allow us to gain time on the construction components of the infrastructure that's required to be in place prior to the school being constructed. The rest I would have to defer to the construction director or anyone else who wants to chime in. Just property.
And to review, schools' new facilities would start opening in 2018. Should this go forward per your recommendation?
Some of them would open in 2020.
Okay.
Do we have that timeline on there? No, we don't. But Some in 18, some in 20.
Some in 18, some in 2020. This person also said thank you for listening, so I want to acknowledge their gratitude also. What is the average, when we look system-wide, what is the average class size now, and do these new facilities help impact that at all?
I actually have to explain that class size varies from school to school, and it also varies from class to class. So for example, if you just think of gym class, one of the reasons gym class is really big is so that the other classes that are happening in that same hour can be smaller. Okay, so when you build a schedule, you balance the big classes and the little classes so that you can manage class size. Also at our elementary schools particularly, and somewhat at our middle schools as well, each school community makes some choices. They have their own budget based on how many kids they have, and so they make those choices every year about how big classes will be and how many teachers they need to hire depending on their coursework. So having new schools allows more seats to be available for more choice, but it does not necessarily guarantee smaller class sizes, because the school could choose to have regular sized class sizes and use that extra funding to offer more things. Each school makes those choices themselves. We don't mandate that from Central.
So overall, with the new facilities and the additions, how many, what additional capacity does that give us total?
That's a Brendan question.
I can see everyone doing math in their heads
Yeah.
per facility, so.
It's going to be a range, you know, we don't know exactly. And I will say that what we think the school is going to open at is not the capacity of that building. It's going to open and feel a little empty when it opens because it's going to have a lot more room. Otherwise, we would be building a school and needing another one 5 years later. So we're building a school that's big enough to grow. Okay.
Yeah, and we have yet to design the schools. So we are just simply taking the Fossil Ridge footprint and the Bethke Rice model with some slight improvements that have been required, shown to be somewhat necessary. And so in theory, without a design, we're planning on about a 1,300 student middle school, high school in the Wellington area, about an 1,800 student in the Prospect area, and then about a 600 student. Now there are a lot of determinations for the elementary, correct, and then a slight increase for the ZAC with modification in the expansion. But again, the educational model that Todd Eady and the superintendent decide can change that. The calculations that we use to determine how many students are, I get the easy job. I just say there's 25 kids in a class, or there's 20 kids in a class, or 30 kids in a class. They have the hard job of actually determining and helping the principals determine how many kids actually fit in those classes. So it really would vary, but that is the general number. So that's what, 3,700?
Yeah, something like that. Just under 4,000, yeah.
So I want to encourage you to keep writing down those questions despite how this huge stack looks. We will get through all of them. That is my goal. And actually, the more questions we have, the better this forum is. So please continue to write those down. You can have as many cards, as many pens, as many questions, as many comments as you want. Let's talk a little bit about maybe some cost savings measures. We're talking about new revenue. Let's talk a little bit about what we have done or could do to save money. And the suggestion here, or the question was, can custodial staff be subcontracted to save money? And have you considered that?
I believe that, Dave can answer that question, but I believe that was considered during the recession and was discarded as actually not being cheaper, but that I will let you answer since you were here.
Dr. Smyser is absolutely correct. That was something we thought about briefly during the recession and determined that that was not going to be the best course of action for our district, although I will tell you we're always asking ourselves that question because as a school district, especially in some of those trade areas, it is hard to compete with the private industry, and sometimes it's easier to hire the private industry that won't be necessarily working the full year round or whatever. But we did consider that a while back and decided that it wasn't a good time to explore that, but it is something that we think about on a regular basis.
One of the other things that sometimes school districts do is contract out their transportation department, their buses, and that also we believe are doing cheaper by doing it ourselves.
I think you should probably just stay there, Dave. So does the district have any property that can be sold to offset some of the costs of the new facilities?
The district does have some property. I don't believe that we're looking to sell any of that property. I'm confirming that with our planning department. So yes, we do have some property, but we're not planning on selling any of that property at this point.
I think the most common one that people think of is the one by Budweiser, right? And we still do own that piece of property. It was purchased, I think, when Don Unger was superintendent. And we still own it. It is, we believe, in the wrong place for our growth that we're experiencing right now. But we're not ready to sell it yet because we're not sure what this whole region's going to do, and we don't want to look back 20 years from now and say, why did we sell it? We need another high school right over there. So we'll see. But at this point, we're banking it, and land banking is pretty much always a good idea. So.
Yep.
Great. So still focusing on how we spend our money, why are we sharing money with the charter schools, and are they considered a state school, officially a state school?
The charter schools are, the 4 that we would share money with are our charters. So they had to apply to the Board of Education to be a charter, so they are one of our schools. We have an interesting relationship with charters, that is state law, the way charters are set up. So I'm not the boss of their staff, and the board has minimal involvement with them. They have a lot of freedom and a lot of waiving of state requirements. But they are part of our district, and they do not own their facilities. And so it's difficult for them to do things like this. It's not uncommon for school districts to include them in bonds if they're part of your district. In our district, we also have state charters that are not part of our district. So there's district charters and there's some state charters, and we have essentially no relationship with the state charters, and we would not include them in this, if that answers the question.
And in the sharing of the money, yes, we do have to share operational dollars with the charter schools per state law. They're allowed to get a flow through of the money that the district receives to help fund their schools too.
Per kid, the same way
Per
our
kid,
other schools
yeah.
do. Yeah.
Great. Before we go back to talking specifically about Wellington and this community, a few more general questions. Does this bond money address the air conditioning issue that has been brought up in years past?
Yes, it does.
Hooray.
Actually, well, kind of. So what we did after the famous heat day that I called was that we did a full-on engineering study of all of our non-air conditioned buildings. Actually, we looked at all of our buildings, and Pete was unable to be here tonight, but he could have explained it better than I am, I'm sure. We got a number back as to what it would cost to air condition the whole district, all the schools that are not air conditioned. The price tag is $84 million. That's a really lot of money. So we looked at that amount of money, and we looked at what in that study, the whole study was not just about air conditioning, it was about managing the heat. And so there were lots of good engineering suggestions for some of our older buildings about how to manage and mitigate the heat in those buildings. Some of those are quite doable and have been included in this bond. So some of the things that were doable have been included in the update to old facilities by the facilities department. So some of those projects are in there. Some of the projects, it's simply it's not doable to air condition the building. We have some where keep in mind, we have a 10-week window to do construction on existing buildings in the summer. That's it. We got to get in, destroy it, fix it, put it back together, and the teachers literally come in the next day and start school. So some of those changes would require lifting the roofs off, gutting the whole skeleton of the building, putting in the systems and putting the roof back on, which is more like a 6-month job, not a 10-week job. So we would actually have to vacate some of the buildings. So we looked at weighing all of that, and also another interesting piece of information. For the schools that have air conditioning, which some of the newer ones do, they have never used their air conditioning more than 18 days in a school year, in all the history of us having air conditioning in some buildings. So that's a lot of money for 18 days. What it would buy you is year-round use, right? So then you open up the opportunities of doing interesting things with year-round calendars or doing summer programs. And in general, having moved the school calendar 1 week, I can tell you people don't like us moving the calendar.
Dr. Spicer, don't get us off track here.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say that we're pretty, as a community, we're pretty committed to summer vacation. That's when we do our summer stuff. And there's not a lot of appetite for a year-round school. I can tell you that. So that's another reason not to invest $84 million and try to air condition everything. I have to say one more thing. We're very encouraged because with the past bond money that's still being used, finishing up on other improvements we've done, every time we've put one of the new HVAC improvement systems in, it's been better than the year before. And so the ones that went in last summer, the occupants were very happy, and the ones the year before were very happy. So each year they refine the engineering of these units, and they're getting better and better. And I've had a lot of the occupants of some of the older schools say, we don't need air conditioning, we're good. You know, it's just lowered the temperature just enough to make it more doable.
As we bring the focus back to here in Wellington, I want to read a few comments that were submitted. So this one says, many of us are thrilled that you are proposing a Wellington middle school / high school. There's a unique community here, and it's exciting to think our kids could attend a high school here rather than driving to Poudre. Just like the elementary schools and current middle school is excellent, I'm confident a high school here in Wellington would be excellent as well. One more comment. This person says they completely support the proposed plan and that we desperately need a high school here in Wellington.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit more about that again. Can you explain to us when we talk about the Wellington growth area and when we're saying it's growing, it's increasing, what area are we talking about? And there's a few more questions after that. But
That's clearly a Brendan question. Brendan is our planner, in case you can't remember.
you can share
from
my box.
introductions.
So when I track building permits for every region that is part of Poudre School District. So the building permits are actually the ones that are pulled in Wellington proper. But I also track the unincorporated growth area. So when we talk about the boundary, it is, it's a little bit fuzzy. I'm currently using, for most of the modeling, the Wellington Middle School boundary. Now there are some areas, there's quite a bit of growth in the unincorporated regions, but really when you take that as a percentage of, say, the 217 or 219 building permits that Wellington pulled for single-family detached houses last year, that is just Wellington proper. The entire unincorporated portion of Poudre Schools only pulled about 200 or 250 single-family detached permits. Sorry about that. So when I'm talking about the growth area, I'm talking about Wellington proper plus the outlying regions, but really those don't account to a great deal of impact. Wellington proper, you all live up here, you've seen the growth, you've seen the number of subdivisions. There's already a couple more that are planned over by George W. Bush, and then on the east side of I-25, a couple more that are proposed that are going to be platted. So that's what I'm talking about with the Wellington area. But if you take 200 and some odd permits, that's 200 and some odd families, generally in the same age and income bracket, and those typically, in Wellington's case, have a lot of kids.
So speaking of the new facility, let's talk location. Do we have any sites currently in mind, and can you share with us what those are?
Yes and no.
Well.
Yes, we have one in mind, and no, we're not talking about it publicly yet.
Now I feel like I'm going to ask yes or no questions. Can you tell us what size you're looking at?
Well, we're looking for at least 100 acres. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100 to 160 acres is our ideal.
Somewhere in there.
Master plan high school, middle school site.
How about inside city limits or outside city
No.
limits?
Oh.
I've got a really
He has a faking.
Anyone else feel like we're playing 21 questions?
There are a couple sites that are ideal if you look at the Wellington area. Wellington has a large growth management area, which is the area that the county and the town have agreed upon that is an area of which when Wellington grows, the county agrees that will most likely allow those parcels to de-annex or remove themselves from the county and enter into Wellington proper. There are not a lot of acreages, sites that are 100 plus to 160 acres that are within Wellington proper, so many of the sites are adjacent to Wellington. Obviously, we're trying to become the new site to be part of and an integral part of the city, or the town, not the city. And so obviously we'd like it as close as possible to reduce the busing and to encourage walk, make it part and feel part of the town. So we are looking close. There are only a couple sites that really would fit that bill, and we would annex into this town most likely if that time were to come and we purchase that property. And I've already talked to Larry about how that annexation process would work.
And Larry is,
Larry's the town manager.
Ah.
Everyone here knows Larry.
you know, Larry. All right. So still talking about the property a little bit. So what happens, it sounds like you're eyeing a couple of different sites. What happens if that doesn't transpire, or if land, your options A, B, and C don't work out? Do you look at something closer to Fort Collins, or how do you move forward if you don't get exactly what you want?
Well, and that's a question always when you're trying to build a new school, right? Is how ideal can you find the spot? And if you can't find it ideal, you move a little bit past ideal. So we'll just walk down that road and see where we end up.
And I'm just going to go with this. I'm going to keep going with location. So there are rumors that PSD is looking at land very near the dairy. And this just says, just last year, the National Institute of Environmental Health and Sciences published a study that found the air near cattle operations contains bacteria, antibiotics, and genetic material that contributes to antibiotic. Wow, you were testing my ability to read large sentences. Excuse me. And apparently I'm getting older because I need to do this. Cattle operations contain bacteria, antibiotics, and genetic material that contributes to antibiotic resistance in populations living nearby. In addition, air around cattle operations also contains methane, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide. So what kind of considerations are being made about health impacts of building sites under evaluation? And are those type of things being considered when we're looking at locations?
Yes, and I would say that Wellington, the whole town has stinky days now. I know this, okay? But let me just say that as part of the planning and siting process for any school, for all schools, we look at all of those issues. So we're not just looking at infrastructure like traffic and roads and the Prospect interchange and the dairy and all of the other things that are happening in a prospected area, but then what improvements would have to be made, because all of that becomes part of the cost of putting the building up, is dealing with whatever is the unique issue in that school site. We have some other school sites that we already have schools on where a significant portion of the land, the water table is very high. So that's an interesting problem when you can't build on that part of the land. Is it okay for the playground? So we have all types of land issues, and we consider all of them when we're looking at a site.
Great. So what would be the ideal timing with purchasing a site? So, and when do you anticipate that you would close on the property of interest?
Kind of when we get it settled. It takes as long as it takes, I guess, is the right answer.
Back to the actual facility itself, has there been work or discussion around what will actually be constructed at the middle school, high school? So for example, playing fields, bus parking facility, what type of sort of amenities or the general plan for what this facility might look like?
Well, once again, it's basically the fossil site, a little bit smaller with one less wing. So we're actually looking at that exact site design. So same set of fields, practice fields, competition fields, the same that any other high school would have it that Fossil has. So same idea, a little bit smaller. And we would the hope would be to leave the room on the site for that extra wing so that should this area really explode, we could add a wing.
We have just about under 20 minutes, and we have plenty of time to get through questions. I still have a few more here, but please don't hesitate to send those forward as they come to mind and jot them down on those note cards. Looking at the transition from this facility to a new one, how will you determine what happens to this building? I know it's not determined yet, but will there be some sort of public process that also includes the community to figure out the fate of this facility?
I think it would definitely include community input, no question. Whenever the district would abandon a building, people would have plenty of opportunity to talk about it. I see some of our board members had to leave and go to another meeting, but they would clearly want to hear from the community. I know we obviously want to hear from town leadership and see what the options are. It's always kind of an exciting time to find a new use for a historical building and see if the town has an interest or if something cool could come in here and would want the building. I mean, there's lots of options. So.
Great. I'm going to shift gears by talking a little bit, or by sharing a comment. This one says, thank you for good financial management. Making these new buildings looks to be very financially sound and hopefully easy for voters to approve. So another comment there.
If I could add one comment that I forgot earlier on the cost of construction. The inflation on construction is, I don't know of another word other than just shocking. It has escalated so much that it's just really shocking how expensive it is to build anything. And so we're looking at fossil, which cost, how much did fossil cost? 54, somebody remembered it. Lauren, thank you. 54 million, okay, and that was including the land. And now we're looking at 130 million when we already own the land to do the same building and to save architecture costs because we've already designed the building. Yeah, and fossil wasn't built that long ago. So that is what is happening in the cost of construction, which is also one of the reasons we want to build now, even though it's a little different to build a building that's eventually going to fill up as a high school and move the middle school out. So let's get these most expensive buildings out of the ground while it doesn't cost, $600 million to do it. The costs are shockingly escalating. Wow. And by the way, all up and down the Front Range, we're all growing, right? So all school districts are considering the same problem. Thompson will most likely go out for a bond. St. Vrain probably will too. Boulder just passed a $500 and some million bond last year for new construction, and we're all seeing exactly the same costs. So it's not a regional cost issue. That's what it costs per square foot to build a school now. So sooner is better, I think.
Wow. So if this does go forward and the voters have an opportunity to weigh in November and it fails, you talked about some of the measures that you might take to sort of make do, but is there an opportunity to use existing reserves to at least secure the land for these future buildings?
Dave? That's a really good question.
I guess there could be that possibility. I would tell you right now, given the financial condition that we're seeing from the state, so I'm going to shift it to maybe a little bit of a budget conversation. Right now, we're hearing from the state that our budget is going to be stagnant or not looking very good going forward, more of the same that we've been experiencing as K-12 in Colorado for years. So while that is a possibility, I think those reserves may be needed in other places as we enter into another round of potential reductions from the state and funding for our ongoing operations.
Oh, good. The other side of the coin, if we go in November and it passes, just a quick clarification, will the new schools have air conditioning?
Oh. They have tempered air or air conditioning in your design, do you remember? We don't have our facilities people here. Chillers. I think it would be the same chillers that Fossil has, so it's not air conditioning, but it's a chiller system that works remarkably well. Now, nothing's going to chill a building with a couple thousand kids in it on a day that's 100 degrees, but for the average day, they're working pretty well.
This last question is such a good closing question, and I have to make sure that nobody else has anything specific. Is there one over here? Oh. Again, for those folks watching at home, this is not your last opportunity to either attend an event. There's 5 more, I believe, coming up. And also you can submit your questions to info@psdschools.org. And although we're not taking live questions via email today, we'll certainly get back to you within 24 hours. The pressure, everyone's just breathing down your neck to get that written. Thank you for doing that. It really does help us when you guys write these down. It helps us sort through questions and make sure that we get to each and every one. Oh, this is interesting. Would the existing middle school, this building right here, be considered for remodeling the new school splits, after the new school splits? So would you keep this perhaps as an asset for Poudre School District and just consider remodeling it and then moving the middle school, once you outgrow the joint facility, just moving the middle school right back in?
That's a possibility. It's more likely that we might remodel it and make it an elementary school, which would be really weird to have 2 elementary schools across the street from each other. But it would probably work better as a larger elementary than it would as a middle. It depends on the amount of kids and whether it would just continue to be so small. If we really thought it was feasible to keep the middle school in here by remodeling it and expanding it, that would have been our first choice rather than building a new building. But it's just simply too small, and the land is too small. There's no fields, there's nothing that the middle schoolers in the other parts of the district have in terms of size and fields and amenities.
Great. So one of our final questions, this is asking you if you could list 4 bullet points to sell the bond to the public.
4 bullet points. I would say the growth is here, whether we build schools for it or not. Kids are coming. I would say that we can do it, at least this round of it, without raising the tax rate, so we should take advantage of that opportunity. I don't know, maybe those are just 2. You got another one, Daniel? I get 2 more. They said I could have 4. Construction costs are only going to get worse the longer we wait. There's 3.
And every school gets something in the bond.
And every school will get something in the district. That was pretty good. Did I just make the campaign? All right.
That's great. Any other final questions before we start to wrap up? Great. Oh, yes. Let's just have you shout it out.
Yeah, are these slides in this video, are they available online?
They will be.
Yes.
Yes. So we'll go ahead and post this again, psdschools.org. Thank you for that, because it is always nice to absorb the information and go back and look at it again. So let's talk next steps. After we post this online, what happens next?
We have 5 more of these in different regions around the district, and then not just the highly affected areas, but all over. And then it goes back to the board for their final vote, whether they want to change anything. I should say maybe one more thing we didn't bring up. There has been, in Fort Collins, there's been a group of people advocating for a competitive lap swimming pool. I don't know if you've heard about that. And at this point in time, it is not in my plan. So I did not add that into our plan because that would have taken money away from the facilities improvements we need to do to our other schools.
What's the bidding process?
What's the what? Oh, the bidding process. I'll let you do that one, Dave.
The bidding process on the building? I think I'm not exactly the best person to ask about that. I mean, I understand the bidding process. There's two different ways we can go. We can go what's called a CMGC process, or we can go a direct bid process, and I don't know that we've decided on one direction or the other yet. This may be something that we just bid these buildings out directly, and if we do that, we have our purchasing department that contacts all the vendors out there that would be interested in doing something like that and sets the stage for what that bidding process would look like. But it would be a competitive bid.
You have preferred vendors?
On something of this magnitude, a preferred vendor would not be we'd be looking at some type of a bid, whether it be through the CMGC process or a direct bid. It would be a competitive bid process regardless of
For the whole.
whether.
And then that person would do the subcontracting. So we generally do CMGC. It's likely that we will go in that direction.
Can you tell us what CMGC stands for?
I don't know what it stands for.
Management, general contractor.
General contractor, that's right. I should know after we talked about it so much this while. So the CMGC process is simply, and it actually works well in construction like this too, where the architect is actually the one that helps you bid the subcontractors out that do the work. And so there's still bidding that happens, it's just in a different way. Still competitive bidding.
Great, thank you. Again, if you have questions when you leave the room, please don't feel like this was your last opportunity. You can always email info@psdschools.org, or there's 5 other sessions you can come and attend. After those sessions, the board will consider those 2 items that Dr. Smizer talked to us, and it sounds like end of April is when the board will be voting on those issues as well, and you can always reach out to your board member representatives to share your opinion also. With that, Dr. Smizer, any closing thoughts or comments?
Just thanks very much for coming, and we just believe schools are parts of communities. They are a community in and of themselves, and they are part of a greater community, and so we really love the fact that you care and that you like schools.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Have a good night.